I'm Safiah Dhada.
I was born Safiah Henrietta von Bissing. I'm the daughter of Ronimund and Jacqueline von Bissing. I was born in 1955 in Pendaya, Cyprus, the year before my father encountered Subud through Hussein Rofi. My father was born on March 17, 1914 in Hove, England. From the age of 14, he was a seeker and started to read from the great teachings and religions voraciously. He encountered the Gurdjieff Uspensky work in London and knew Gurdjieff, but felt more affinity for Uspensky and Madame Uspensky. He followed that way for many years before coming into contact with Subud. He met Hussein Rofi in Cyprus in April 1956. Hussein had been opened in Indonesia by then and wanted to introduce my father to his Gurdjieff Uspensky group to Subud. Gurdjieff had foreseen that new help would come from Dutch India, and at that time Indonesia was called Dutch East India. My father and Hussein met in England again later that year, and after many questions, he was opened by Hussein in September 1956, and he went on to open my mother, since there were no women in Subud in the West at that time, and Bapak had written to them to say that it was allowed. Hussein then opened the men of a very small group of Gurdjieff Uspensky followers, introduced to him by my father. John Bennett was not among them. Bapak had told Hussein that when he went to the West, Subud would start with a very small group of 12 or so. On December 8, 1956, my father wrote to Bapak inviting him to come to England. Bapak wrote back accepting the offer, saying that he would be coming with his wife and 2 other people. I have the original letter of that. Bapak arrived in London on May 22, 1957, with Ibu, Ismana and Iksan. Hussein had arranged for them to stay at a small boarding house on Dartmouth Road. When my father and some of the group first entered, they were greeted by Bapak, who said, "Welcome, I've waited a long time to meet you." It was later explained that Bapak had seen some of the early Subud members and now recognized them, having seen them in person. The women of the small group were then opened by Ibu. Latihan was practiced in the small boarding house, but Hussein had to play recordings of animal noises while it was going on, as some form of explanation to the other boarders. Soon it became clear that this place was not suitable. By this time, John Bennett had joined the group. Bennett proposed Bapak and his party move to his house at Coombe Springs, and Bapak agreed. This move proved to be fateful in the long run, since Bennett ran a breakaway Gurdjieff group, having been cut off from the mainstream Gurdjieff and Uspensky groups for mixing. Thus, Subud, having a base at Bennett's establishment, was immediately suspect to both Gurdjieff and Uspensky's followers. Bennett later offered to give Coombe Springs to Bapak. However, when he left Subud and joined the Idris Shah work, he gave it to Idris Shah instead. Whatever the case, Coombe did serve an important function in the first years of Subud in the West, but sadly most Gurdjieff and Uspensky followers did not join or stay in Subud. Over the course of his life, my father continuously received writings and poems. He would scribble them down on bits of paper or on restaurant napkins if that's where he happened to be at the time. I've discovered stacks of his manuscripts and correspondence in boxes, which I have to go through. His books, Songs of Submission, Songs of the Heart, and Aspirant, can be found on the Subud Archives website and are being uploaded to the Subud Library. Songs of the Journey and Songs of the Wayfarer will be added when I find a copy to send to the Subud Archives. Concerning the writing of Songs of Submission, I quote from my father's unpublished autobiography, The Best of Both Worlds. The time at Rethaldrum was a momentous time for me. For the first time, I wrote in the way Bapak had foreseen. Soon after meeting Bapak in London in May 1957, he told me one day you will write a commentary on Susila Bodhidharma. You don't have to study or think. You just take paper and pencil and let the writing come. At that time, Susila Bodhidharma associated in my mind with his book, Susila Bodhidharma. I found it difficult to understand or accept that I would write a commentary on Bapak's book. It seemed impossible to consider. I had already read it long before Bapak came to the West, but to write a commentary on that could never reconcile itself in my mind. I later understood that for Bapak, Susila Bodhidharma was Subud, and Subud was Susila Bodhidharma. From that time on, I always kept paper and pencil handy in case if needed, but nothing happened. At Rathodran there was a drawing room which we did not use, and there was a desk in it. And in this desk I put paper and pen and pencil, just in case. One day, soon after we had arrived, and a month or more before Bapak came, I was passing the door of the drawing room, and I suddenly felt I needed to go in there. The Latiham was very strong in me, and I felt drawn to go in, to go to the desk and to take the paper and pencil. I put pen to paper and started to write. I did not think, I just wrote. As I wrote, I understood what I was writing, and the writing continued. This extraordinary experience continued until it came to an end. I put my writing materials away to continue later. There was no telling when I would be called again. Sometimes I would be called later in the day, sometimes in the night. This was the beginning of what later would become Songs of Submission.
When God first made the world, he gave man the way to himself. The world was to be a passing place for man, as though in growing up he had to go on a journey, leaving his father's house and travelling through many lands before returning again to his father's house, stronger by the experience of having fulfilled a task. The love of the son for his father would lead him safely back in due season, and this love would protect him from enmeshment in the places he would pass through. But for all men, this was not so. Once separated from their father's house, as they travelled into strange lands, they became, as it were, entranced. They forgot that their true home was elsewhere, and that in truth they were as strangers in the strange lands. They dwelled in the bazaars, buying and selling. They began to amass great quantities of goods which, had they thought of it, they would have known they could never wish to carry home with them. Forgetting their origin and their nature, they entered into the hopes and fears of the peoples of these strange lands and believed that their place was there. At first, these other peoples seemed strange to them, but soon they felt part of them too, and took to their hopes and fears, their loves and hates. Soon they too were strutting and setting themselves up as somebody, since everybody else did it too. It seemed natural. These others whom they met were indeed in the same plight as themselves. They had come from the same house of the same father, but journeying in the same way and for the same reason, and should return in due season to the same end. But many stayed already a long time. Many had totally lost the remembrance that they had had at the start. Many were like streams that wander from the main river and lose themselves among the marshes. It was such particularly who buttoned-holed newcomers and passionately tried to infect them with the sickness from which they were suffering. A few there who walked through the marketplace coolly, freely, smiling to adjust themselves as well as they could to the strange ways for the short time they would be there. Some, from seeing them, would remember the truth about themselves. They too then would smile, and while enjoying would look forward to the time of their return. Others would find the freedom of such offensive as though an insult to themselves, and would vomit their anger at them and their kind, and dig themselves the deeper into the place they had come to, until, in truth, they were a part of it. So the place that God created for man became for him not a journeying place on the passage from and to his Father, but instead his graveyard. God is spirit, and his children spirit. But the world God made of things, and when they entered it, because they had been given things as accessories to help them, themselves became things. Given a body as a coat to warm them in the cold, they became that body and believed only in it. Given appetite to guide them in maintaining their body, they sought nothing more than to satisfy that, and to excess. Given pleasure in all that was beneficial for them, they sought only the pleasure, so that in the end it became the end in itself. Given mind to serve them, they became its slave. In this way they came to disease the body, the disease of the body, the disease of the feeling, the disease of the mind. Unhappiness and despair came to them, for in giving pleasure to them in what was right, God had also to guide them against wrong, provided that unhappiness and misfortune should flow from the following of wrong. But instead of understanding that, their condition was indeed the proof of God's mercy in warming them and guiding them away from what was hurtful for them. They dug themselves under with pride and cursed God, or denied him, or turned away their faces. And then the voice of God was heard in the valley of lamentation, and through the delirium of mankind. For the spirit within man remained, and it was still of the same nature as God. God called to man, and sent his power among them. He did not counsel or command. He called as a father to his children who had forgotten him. He offered them of himself, if they would open their souls to him. And in opening their souls to him, they found the way out of the abyss. The delirium of their fever passed. Happiness came upon them. And they lost the dread of leaving that place, knowing that when they would be released, they would be going home.